Well, welcome to Christ and Culture. This is Pastor Jeff Short. Glad to have you along for our discussion today. We always pick a topic of biblical and cultural interest to see how those two fit together. We want to make everything biblical. We want to think through everything biblical. We don't want to be inconsistent in our faith. A lot of people, they don't understand that when you live inconsistently in respect to the Bible, then you're actually in disobedience. Now, you don't actually even need a specific verse in the Bible that says, for example, abortion is wrong. When you're thinking about things out there in culture, you don't need a verse that says abortion is wrong in order to be consistently biblical and know that abortion is wrong. The Bible tells us in the Ten Commandments, the book of Exodus, it says, thou shalt not murder. The word there in the Hebrew means murder. It does not simply just mean kill. It does not mean that you can't go to war for a just cause and kill the enemy. That is not prohibited in the Ten Commandments. What is prohibited is murder. And so we are commanded not to murder by the Lord God Almighty in many, many verses, and that teaching is so crystal clear, I don't think anyone would doubt it. Now, when we apply consistently that law, thou shalt not murder, to the killing of unborn children, we realize that killing unborn children is murder because they're innocent. They haven't done anything wrong. They don't deserve any punishment. They're not facing the death penalty. For example, if you commit capital murder, if you kill someone and you premeditated murder, you get the death penalty. Well, the children in the womb have done nothing wrong, and so they don't deserve to die. And to kill them is murder. And so that's a biblical, consistent application. And this has been understood all throughout church history. You don't live inconsistently with the Bible. But today we have a lot of people who think that it's perfectly okay to live inconsistent with the Bible as long as you don't violate, for example, the statement of faith in your church. For example, the Apostles' Creed. It says, I believe in God the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, and it goes on and lists some of the really important doctrines of the Christian faith. Or you could recite, some churches recite the Nicene Creed. Others recite the Athanasius Creed concerning God and the Trinity and the deity of Christ. And then there are other statements of faith, for example, like the Westminster Standard of Faith. There is the London Baptist Confession. There are Lutheran confessions. And all kinds of different creedal statements. And some Christians say, well, as long as I don't violate any of those statements of faith, I'm good, consistent Christian. And if you look in all of those statements of faith, if you look in, for example, the Westminster Confession of Faith, the Protestant Presbyterian Westminster Confession of Faith, there's nothing that deals with abortion. And so Presbyterians might say, well, I'm not violating the faith. There's nothing in the creed that says anything about abortion. Or if you look at some of the other more even older statements of faith, for example, the Apostles' Creed and so forth, nothing about abortion in them. So some Christians say, well, I'm a good Christian. I'm not violating any of the statements of faith. That's what some of these professors do at these liberal-leaning evangelical colleges. They say, well, I'm all for example, if some of the liberal professors might say, well, I'm all for LGBTQ rights, and nothing in the statement of faith that says anything against that. But they're not being consistent because the Christian faith is not just only what's written in the statements of faith or the creeds. The Christian faith is a lot more than that. It's being consistent with God's revelation as found in the Bible. And the statements of faith and the creeds are just the big main points. But that doesn't mean that there aren't other truths that are important. And you also have to remember that these creeds were formulated in order to address a specific problem that was brewing in the church. And so these creeds were the result of holy leaders in the Christian church came together and said, hey, we need a creed that states that we are not, for example, early heresy was Arianism, which basically tried to take away the deity of Christ. We're going to make in the creed a statement of faith that says we are affirming the deity of Christ. And so they did it in response to an error, a heresy, and needed correction, and so they put that in the statement of faith. Well, there are many things that need to be included in the statements of faith that just haven't yet, and perhaps one day they will be. But the creeds are not simply things that were given to the church by, for example, Jesus. They are teachings that come from Jesus and the apostles that Christians have believed and are essential for Christian belief. And it grows in response to the crises that are required to define the truth from the error in every different age. So just because it's not in the creeds or the statements of faith doesn't mean that it's consistent with Christianity. So we need to be consistent with Christianity. Now, one of the things that people have to deal with today is we live in a culture of lies. We live in a news media of lies. They spin the truth, they distort the truth, they cover up the truth, they hide the truth, they change the conversation, they dominate the conversation, they control the conversation. And what we have to do is be aware of the fact that we're being lied to and we're being propagandized. And as Christians, we need to really be on top of this because our whole faith is based on truth. And so we need to be very, very discerning and make sure that we're believing the truth and not being taken in by the lies. So today I want to talk about what we're being told, again, in the media and by the science and health experts, so-called, about the mandatory, and I don't say that word because a lot of times YouTube is censoring out people who talk about certain topics. I've already had a couple YouTube videos censored and had my video and a strike against me because I dared to talk about topics that I guess certain tech companies and certain government and party officials don't want you to talk about. It's sad that we live in a day and age where you cannot have free and open discussion about anything that is important in society. You have to live within these very narrow walls. And if you talk about something that's forbidden, they will actually censor you and actually kick you off the platform. So I have to be careful. So what I'm going to say is, for example, the current government is wanting to mandate, and I'll call them cookies. They want Joe's cookies. They want everyone to have Joe's cookies. And I have to say that I've already had the 2-shot cookie, and I did it not because the government was telling me I had to. I just looked at the data and I saw that, hey, usually they study a vaccine or a cookie, if we're calling it today. Usually they study these things for 5 years and give approval after maybe 5 years. That's usually a minimum amount of time that it takes to study these new drugs. But in light of the epidemic and the pandemic that we're going through, I decided that after 1 year of testing, it seemed like it was safe enough for me as an adult to take. And so I opted in to go ahead and get the cookie. And I did get the 2-dose cookie. And But what I want to talk about now is we have to be careful because we're going to be told that we have to do all kinds of things, but we're not getting the information correct from the sources, and this is misleading. So what we're going to look here is in the local newspaper here in New York, the Post-Journal. It says that many parents looking forward to vaccinating children. In other words, they're advocating giving the cookies now to children. And the strange thing about that is that children do not represent hardly any kind of a risk of getting this disease, or not disease, but getting the virus, and they don't represent hardly any kind of risk. It's almost zero of being hospitalized or dying from it. So children are really without any risk at all, practical risk of coming down with this. But there's a whole push now. Joe Biden and the administration, they want everyone to get the cookie. And so they're pressuring and they're intimidating people. And you would think, well, they can't intimidate the medical profession. They can't intimidate science. Science is objective. Medicine is an objective science. Well, I want to show you here how much pressure and intimidation and politics have entered into the science and medicine, because here is a doctor, and we're going to look at some of the things that he says. He says a lot of things. We may not be able to get through the whole article, but I just want to show you how we need to be very critical and discerning in what we believe that we're being told, even now from the doctors and the so-called medical experts, because they have been corrupted, and the sciences have been corrupted, and the scientific journals have been corrupted, and the scientific groups and organizations have been corrupted. The healthcare industry has been corrupted. And there's so much political ideology in everything that's being said today, is it's really hard to know what you can actually take face value, and because there's so many lies out here. Well, here is a Dr. Alejandro Huberman, UPMC Children's Community Pediatrics president, is pictured during a news conference Friday in Pittsburgh. Okay, so let's see what this doctor says and see if we can understand and discern what the truth is and what the lies are. UPMC is ready to provide vaccines to some of the youngest patients, according to a panel of doctors who presented during a press conference in Pittsburgh. And many local parents are looking to get the cookie for their children. Dr. Alejandro Huberman, UPMC Children's Community Pediatrics president, said that the Pfizer cookie for children age 5 through 11 is here, and the hospital system is ready. It says that we have a lot of experience with this cookie in adults and adolescents, Huberman said. Well, let's stop there. We have a lot of experience with this cookie in adults and adolescents, Huberman said. Again, I'm using that word so that our censors, our big tech overlords, will not take this down. We have a lot of experience with this cookie in adults and adolescents. Oh, really? Do we have a lot of experience with this? Do we really have a lot of experience with this? Now, I thought that this was a brand new technology. I thought that this was something that has not been used before in this particular application. I thought this technology was experimental. I thought that the FDA gave emergency use authorization for this cookie. And now he's saying we have a lot of experience. What does it mean when he says we have a lot of experience with this? Well, it means we have maybe a year and a half now of experience with this. Well, that's not the normal time that it takes to bring out a new cookie. It usually takes at least 5 years and sometimes all the way up to 10 years of testing to just verify that this thing is safe for the masses to put into their body. Well, so he's telling people that we have a lot of experience. Well, I guess if you consider the fact that they've injected this cookie into millions and millions of people all over the world, that's a lot of experience with this particular formula, but it doesn't mean that they have a lot of experience in the sense that they know long-term what the effects of this cookie are. And so you have to take what he's saying right here with a grain of salt. Because how can you get experience with a new novel experimental drug? You can't. Impossible. The time frame doesn't work. He also says it has been thoroughly studied in young children, and it showed the same outcome. Again, thoroughly studied. What does that mean? Does that mean a long-term 5-year like we normally do before we introduce drugs into the population? Does it mean that it's been authorized and meet the old standard protocols? No, it doesn't mean that at all. He's using this to get people to have confidence in this new experimental treatment when he knows in his own heart that this has not been thoroughly studied the way in the past we've done this when we roll out these new cookies. Especially for young children. It hasn't been studied even as long as it has for adults. So not only has it not been studied as thoroughly as it has for adults, and that isn't very long, it's been less studied in young children. But he's saying it has been studied thoroughly. That is, I guess if you want to modify that word thoroughly, but it's not the old standard that we were applying to all of these new drugs just years before. And he says it showed the same effectiveness, same outcome. It is safe and effective, and it will save lives. Safe and effective. Again, he's using the word thoroughly studied in a new and novel way because before, when you roll out these drugs, they have to be tested for years for the long-term effects. And after 5 years, maybe a drug will be approved because it has, after 5 years, the feeling is if you've studied it 5 years and the effects are minimal, it's probably good to go. And so that was the old standard protocol for approval. But now, during the pandemic, we have changed that protocol standard, and now we've lowered the protocol standard. And so all of these agencies like the Food and Drug Administration, they are now fast-tracking all of these things as if, oh, well, the old protocols, they don't apply anymore, and plus we've studied it thoroughly. Studying it in millions and millions of people over a shorter period of time does not equal studying it over a lot of people over a long period of time. And that is the concern, that these things are not tested long-term. They are effective. They have shown to be effective in the short term, but we're learning more about that even. So he's saying that we have a lot of experience and we've studied this and it showed the same outcome. It's safe and effective and it will save lives. It's safe and effective. It's effective for a time period. And now the studying is coming out as to how long that time period is. And it looks like maybe 6 months that this thing starts to wane. So even in the word effective, that has to be qualified. Effective, how long is it effective? For a month? For 2 months? 6 months? A year? Again, if it's effective, you're given the impression that this thing, you get the cookie and you're good to go. You can return back to normal life. Things will be okay. All is fine. And then now they tell you after they give you it, wait a minute, you have to come back and we have to give you a third. And then after that, we have to give you a fourth and a fifth and a sixth and a seventh. Well, you're not saying that. You're not saying that up front. You're giving the wrong impression. So we're being given a very massaged and we're given a very worked over and a very propagandized statement here. And this is coming from a physician. This is coming from a scientist. This is coming from a doctor who you're supposed to be able to trust that they'll give you the straight answer, and they're not. They're giving you a lot of political ideology mixed in there. There have been 6.5 million cases in children of all ages in the United States and 750 deaths overall. How many deaths occur every year from the common flu? We're not told. How many total deaths of children die every year? And what are their causes of death? And how does this fit in proportion to, say, the common cold or a common flu or some of the other things that are out there? We're not told. So that standalone number, 750 deaths, that is not put in context of the flu, because children die of the flu every year, and they die in the hundreds, and probably more children die. I don't have this statistic with me, but I've heard that more children die of the flu every year than die of this disease, this virus every year. So that would put it into context, but they're not interested in putting it into context because they want you to do what they want you to do. In children 5 through 11, there are almost 2 million cases. Yes, there may be cases, but deaths are very rare in the total population. And also this number, is it died of COVID or died with COVID? Again, there are so many different things that you have to look at. Over 8,300 children have been hospitalized and over 5,000 children had multisystem inflammatory syndrome. Okay? Due to COVID. Okay, how many have these things with the flu every year? And how many have these things for the last 5 years every year, if you look at statistics? And we didn't panic and we didn't make a big deal. The fact is that children are so out of risk of dying, that it's almost zero. Haberman said children can have serious outcomes with the virus, and they can also transmit the virus to vulnerable family community members who are at risk for severe outcomes. Well, if the family is all vaccinated and they're not in a high risk, then what's the problem? Again, no context. 750. Some may say the rates are low. And they are. Some may say the rates are low. Why don't you say that? Because you're a doctor, you're supposed to be objective science. But in my eyes, it's 750 too many. Oh, so maybe if there's one person, one child that dies of COVID, that's still one too many, and you have to give the cookie to all the children in the entire country because one child died of it? I guess in your eyes, that would be one too many, right? See, the logic here is not that of science. So this doctor is not using the scientific reasoning and rational thinking. He's using this emotional thinking. Some may say the rates are low, but in my eyes, it's 750 too many. That's an emotional appeal. That's not a scientific appeal. So he is talking as a scientist, but he's talking emotionally, not rationally. Each one was a child who lost a long future and who left behind those who loved them. Again, that's the emotional appeal. That's not a rational appeal. Did we talk this way about the flu killing children? Did we do that before this pandemic? Did we talk that way about all kinds of things that children die from? No, we didn't. We need to understand that this is now a cookie-preventable disease like measles or polio or many other diseases that affect children. As a society, we must protect our children, and the vaccine can do that. Right, we must protect our children, and one of the ways that parents want to protect their children is they don't want to pump an experimental fluid into the body of their child. They especially don't want to do that when their child probably represents almost a zero chance of dying from this virus. That's science. But instead, we're getting this emotional appeal. So it goes on and talks about, there are some parents who are very anxious to get their child vaccinated. Again, although there represents hardly any kind of risk to that child. But I guess the order from on high, the cultural elites, is that everyone has to have this cookie and everyone must eat this cookie and everyone must do it the way the people on high, the elites, are telling us we must do it. And we can't think for ourselves. And even if it takes corrupting science, even if it takes corrupting the medical fields, even if it affects corrupting the nurses and the attendants, everyone must be on the same page. The party line coming from the ruling class, the elites, is that the cookie will be the answer to the end of this virus epidemic. That is the one-shot solution. They don't want to talk about vitamin D. They don't want to talk about getting exercise and reducing your weight and reducing obesity. They don't want to talk about any of the other therapeutics that are out here that have been in circulation. Some of the therapeutics that have been approved for 40 years, 50 years for antiviral purposes. They don't want to talk about any of that. Everything has to come down to this cookie, and you have to take the cookie, and if you don't, you're a bad person, and we're going to pressure you, and we're going to mandate it, and you're going to lose your job if you don't. You're going to get kicked out of college if you don't. You're going to suffer economic hardships. You're going to be on the outskirts and marginalized in society if you don't do exactly as the ruling elites do. And as Christians, we need to say, no, this is wrong. This is wrong. We use our own brains and we make our own decisions when it deals with our family, especially our children. See you next week on another program. God bless.